When I was little, my mom used to tell me stories about my grandpa, how he started with nothing and built a business that could have set us up for life. But we never saw a dime of it. I didn't really get why until I was older and could understand the mess about his will and all. "Eliza, your grandpa was a tough nut," my mom said one chilly evening. We were sitting at our small kitchen table, nursing cups of lukewarm tea. The heater was busted again, and the landlord wasn't too quick to fix anything. He believed only in money earned, not given. "Why did he cut us off then? Didn't he think you'd manage his money right?" I asked, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Mom sighed, her eyes tracing the steam rising from her cup. "It wasn't about me managing it. He had this crazy idea. Made a will that only gave his fortune to someone who made it big on their own, $500,000 at least in their business." "That's just cruel," I muttered. The idea seemed ludicrous, a game set by a man who loved his money more than his family. "It was his way or the highway," Mom continued. "When I argued with him, he practically disowned me. Said if I was any good, I'd earn my way without his help. The unfairness of it all gnawed at me. Here we were, scrimping and saving every dime, while someone out there was living it up on what should have been ours. Ever since I was a kid, I had a knack for spotting a chance to make a buck. I'd set up a lemonade stand at the local golf course on sweltering summer days. 50 cents a cup. I'd holler, waving to the thirsty golfers. They couldn't resist the pitch from a freckle-faced kid with a pitcher. "You sure know how to hustle, kiddo," an old golfer named Hank once told me, chuckling as he handed over his change. "Keep that up, and you'll be a tycoon one day." I grinned, pocketing the coins. "Just saving up for something big," I'd say, my mind always on the next big thing. And it wasn't just lemonade. I made homemade baubles and bracelets, stringing them together from beads I'd find at the dollar store. I sold them wherever I could, neighborhood block parties, school events, even at the front yard during garage sales. Trading wasn't just fun, it felt right, like I was meant to do it. "Eliza's got her own little business empire going," my mom would joke to her friends, but there was a hint of pride in her voice that made me stand a little taller. But it was the sewing that really caught on. When I managed to buy that old sewing machine from a garage sale, it was like all my Christmases had come at once. Teaching myself to sew wasn't easy. The machine was temperamental, and the tutorials online weren't always clear, especially when the internet connection flickered in and out. But I stuck with it. Soon, I was turning drab thrift store finds into trendy outfits. "Eliza, is that the same shirt you wore last week?" Sarah sneered one day as she caught me at my locker. "Looks different." "Yep, gave it a little makeover," I said casually, slamming my locker shut. "You should try it sometime, might improve your attitude." She scoffed and strutted away, but a couple of other girls lingered. "That was really cool what you did with your shirt. Could you do mine?" one of them asked, a shy smile playing on her lips. "Sure thing. Bring it tomorrow," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. Word got around, and soon I was taking custom orders. It wasn't just pocket money anymore, it was real business. People paid good money for uniqueness, and I was all too happy to provide. One sunny afternoon, I dragged my latest creations to the local street fair. I set up a rickety table, laid out my garments, and waited, heart thumping with the thrill of it all. "You think people will buy these?" Mike, my friend, asked, eyeing the passers-by skeptically. "They'd be crazy not to," I shot back, confidence bubbling. And buy they did. My table was swarmed. I barely had time to collect the money and hand over the clothes. Amidst the chaos, a guy approached, his car keys jangling in his hand. "Hey, my car broke down a block from here. Saw your stall. This stuff yours?" he asked, nodding towards my makeshift display. "Yeah, all made by me. You need something to pass the time while waiting for a tow?" I joked, handing him a shirt. He laughed, a genuine, head-thrown-back kind of laugh. "Actually, I was wondering if you do men's stuff too." "Sure do," I replied, pulling out a few pieces I'd experimented with. He looked them over, then looked at me with a spark of interest. You've got talent. Ever think of making this a real business? Every day, I said, not missing a beat. His smile widened. I'm Jack, by the way. Eliza, I said, shaking his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another sale. This felt like a doorway, swinging wide open. As the day wound down, I counted the cash, a sense of accomplishment washing over me. This was it. I was making it happen, one stitch at a time. Told you they'd love your stuff, Mike said as he helped me pack up. Yes, you were right, I admitted, unable to keep the grin off my face. Looks like I might just make that $500,000 mark after all. After Jack and I met at the fair, things kicked off faster than I expected. He wasn't like the guys I knew, he came from money, but he had a way of making you forget about that when you were with him. He had this laid-back vibe, always laughing, always making plans. We started seeing each other more, and it wasn't long before we were seriously dating. One day he said, Eliza, I think it's time you met my parents. The thought alone made my stomach churn. I knew his folks came from old money, the kind that looked down on people like me. Are you sure? I asked, my voice tense. I don't think they'll like me much. Jack laughed it off. They'll love you. Don't worry so much. The drive over to Jack's parents' house felt like the longest ride of my life. Jack kept talking about mundane stuff, probably trying to ease the tension, but my stomach was in knots. We turned into a long driveway, and there it was, a massive house that looked more like a museum than a home. We walked up to the grand entrance, and the door swung open before we could even knock. There stood Jack's mom, Mrs. Thompson, dressed impeccably in a way that made me feel underdressed instantly, despite my careful choice of outfit. Jack, darling, she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug, then turned to me with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. And you must be Eliza. We've heard so much about you. Her words sounded warm, but her tone was anything but. I forced a smile. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Thompson. Jack led me inside, and that's when Mr. Thompson appeared. He was a tall, stern-looking man with a firm handshake that felt more like a test than a greeting. Eliza, a pleasure, he said, his voice deep and unemotional. We moved into the living room, which was as grand and cold as the rest of the house. Everything felt stiff and formal. We made small talk, or at least, they did. I mostly nodded and smiled, feeling out of my depth. Dinner was served in a dining room straight out of a magazine, with crystal and fine china that looked like it should be locked up in a display case, not used for eating. We sat down, and that's when the real interrogation began. So, Eliza, Jack tells us you're into fashion design, Mr. Thompson began, eyeing me like I was a problem he needed to figure out. Yes, I run a small business. I design and sell clothing, I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Self-made then. How entrepreneurial, he commented dryly. His tone suggested it was less of a compliment and more a checkmark on a list of curiosities. Mrs. Thompson chimed in with a smile that felt more like a wince. And your family, dear, what do they do? Well, it's just me and my mom. She's a nurse, I said, feeling the weight of each word. Oh, I see. Mrs. Thompson replied, exchanging a glance with her husband that I couldn't quite read. The conversation stumbled along until coffee was served, and then Mrs. Thompson's polite mask slipped. Eliza, I must be honest. We have certain hopes for Jack, and his partner's background is important to us. It's essential for maintaining the family's reputation and legacy. Finally, she put her fork down and said flatly, well, it's clear you've done quite a bit despite your background. But I don't think you're suitable for our son, I'm afraid. Her words hit like a slap. I sat there, stunned, as she got up from the table. I won't waste more time here, she declared and left the room without another word. Jack was quick to comfort me, his face flushed with embarrassment. Eliza, please, don't take it to heart. She's just, she said in her ways. It was tough to swallow. The evening had turned into a stark display of where I stood with his family. Despite Jack's reassurances, the shadow of that dinner lingered, casting a long, cold shadow over what should have been a happy milestone. The engagement happened despite the frosty atmosphere at dinner that night at Jack's parents' house. His folks made it clear they weren't thrilled, but Jack went ahead with the proposal. We were officially engaged, and while I was over the moon about us, the chill from his parents was something I couldn't shake off. A few weeks after our engagement, I got a call from Mrs. Thompson, Jack's mom. Her voice was formal, icy. "Eliza, I'd like you to come over. We need to discuss something important." When I arrived, both of Jack's parents were waiting. The house felt colder than ever, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. Mrs. Thompson didn't waste any time. "Eliza, we've looked into your background thoroughly," she began, her tone sharp and unwelcoming. Mr. Thompson nodded, his face stern. "It's clear you come from a very different world than ours." His wife continued. "And frankly, we feel you're hunting for wealth, climbing through our son. But we won't allow our family fortune to be jeopardized." The words stung, but before I could react, Mrs. Thompson slid a stack of papers across the table towards me. "Since I can't convince Jack to rethink this marriage, you'll need to sign these," she said flatly. I picked up the papers. They were a prenuptial agreement. As I read through, it was clear, I wouldn't lay claim to any of Jack's wealth, and neither would any children we might have. Without hesitating, I signed them. "I'm not marrying Jack for his money," I said, handing the signed papers back to her. Mrs. Thompson looked taken aback, her eyes wide. Even Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, surprised by my quick compliance. I left their house feeling a mix of relief and resentment. At home, I told Jack everything. He laughed it off. "Wow, you really showed them. Good for you." But his laughter didn't sit right with me. "Aren't you bothered that your mom thinks so lowly of me? She humiliated me, Jack." He shrugged, still smiling. "I get why you're upset, but you know how mom is. She has her reasons, and well, she's not completely wrong to worry, right?" His words felt like a slap. Not only had his mother insulted me, but now Jack was subtly defending her. It hurt, realizing that maybe he wasn't entirely in my corner. A year after our engagement, as the wedding drew closer, my life was a whirlwind of excitement and stress. My business, a sportswear brand I had started from scratch, was finally taking off. It was thrilling to see my designs being worn and loved. I had built a small capital, enough to expand and take on bigger challenges. As for the wedding, I wanted something simple, intimate. But Jack had other ideas. He dreamed of a lavish celebration. "Eliza, we're only doing this once. Let's make it big," he'd say with that grin that made it hard to argue. So, I agreed, and we planned a grand event. I found myself splitting the bill for a grand venue, exquisite catering, and a band that could keep our guests dancing all night. I managed to snag some deals, haggling discounts wherever I could. Old habits die hard. The wedding day was perfect, at least on the surface. Our guests seemed to have the time of their lives, and Jack and I couldn't stop smiling. We were floating, caught up in a bubble of joy. But not everyone was caught up in the festivity. Throughout the evening, I caught Jack's parents whispering, their faces pinched with disapproval. His mother, ever the social butterfly, floated around the room, dropping hints about her worries that I was after their family wealth. I overheard her telling a group of relatives, "It's all very extravagant, isn't it? I just hope she understands the value of money, not just spending it." Her voice was loud enough to carry, and her words stung more than I expected. After the wedding, things didn't settle down. Jack's mom posted on social media, lamenting that Jack had married someone like me. She wrote about her fear of losing her son to a woman who, in her eyes, wasn't worthy. Reading those words hurt. I felt my throat tighten and my eyes burn, not just with sadness, but with frustration. I tried to talk to Jack about it. "Your mom's posts, they're really harsh. Can you talk to them? They don't even know about the business, how well it's doing." Jack sighed, his face troubled. Eliza, I know it's tough, but let's not rock the boat, okay? My parents, it's just how they are. But they think I'm some gold digger, Jack. They don't see that I don't need their money. He pulled me close, his voice soothing. I know. But let's just ignore it for now. They'll come around. They just need time to see what I see. I nodded, not convinced, but exhausted from the argument. I agreed to let it go, not because I thought he was right, but because I was too tired to fight. It was easier to focus on my business, pouring my energy into something positive, something that was mine. Despite the personal turmoil, my business kept growing. Orders poured in, and my brand gained a following. I was doing interviews, photo shoots, and even talking about partnerships. My days were packed, and I thrived on the hustle. The evening of the charity dinner arrived, and it was held at a swanky hotel downtown. The event was all about supporting sports programs for kids and teenagers. As the main costume designer, I had decided on a blue and white theme that matched not just the decor, but some of the latest pieces from my sportswear line. Jack and I walked into the grand hall, a room buzzing with well-dressed guests and shimmering lights. I was nervous, but excited to see my designs showcased in such a grand setting. That excitement quickly soured when we spotted his parents across the room. Their cold stares cut right through the warmth of the bustling crowd. Jack noticed but said nothing, and their blatant disregard stung me deeply, but I bit my lip and kept walking. As guests began to arrive, I circulated the room, chatting and networking. Jack was by my side, his usual charming self, but I could tell he was a bit overwhelmed by the scale of the event. "You're really pulling out all the stops, huh?" Jack commented as we watched the crowd from a distance. "Go big or go home, right?" I replied with a wink. "Eliza, you've outdone yourself," a familiar voice said from behind me. Turning around, I saw a local sports celebrity who'd worn my designs before. "These uniforms are fantastic." "Thanks so much. Enjoy the evening," I smiled, handing them a business card. "Let's catch up soon." The event was buzzing, the atmosphere electric with enthusiasm and goodwill. Then, the moment of truth arrived. The host took to the stage to thank the sponsors, and my heart raced as he started to speak. We hadn't been seated long when the evening's presenter took the stage to kick off the event. The atmosphere was lively, filled with applause and cheer until it came time to thank the sponsors. My heart raced with pride and anxiety as my name was announced as one of the main contributors. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Eliza, whose generous donation of over $300,000 made tonight possible. The presenter boomed through the microphone. The room erupted in applause, but it was abruptly pierced by a shriek from Mrs. Thompson, Jack's mother. "Absolutely not," she screamed, drawing the room into a shocked silence. She demanded a microphone, and once it was handed to her, she didn't hesitate. "This is preposterous. Eliza couldn't possibly afford this. She's nothing but a poor beggar using my son's money. She's a cunning predator, sneaking into our family to bankrupt us." Her words echoed through the hall, venomous and loud. The presenter, taken aback but composed, quickly tried to correct the situation. "Mrs. Thompson, I assure you, you are mistaken. Eliza's company is extremely successful and fully capable of such generosity. I know this firsthand." The crowd murmured, the tension palpable. Then, in an unexpected move, the presenter passed the microphone to Jack, hoping for him to clear the air. Jack's face was a mix of embarrassment and conflict. He glanced at his parents, then at me, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke into the mic. "I have nothing to say," and with that, he walked over to his parents, leaving me standing alone amidst a sea of whispers. The weight of the moment settled heavy on my shoulders. I felt exposed and humiliated, not just by the accusations, but by Jack's refusal to defend me, to affirm the truth about my success. The pride I had felt in my contribution was tarnished, overshadowed by the drama unfolding around me. Stepping into the spotlight, I approached the microphone, my heart pounding, but my resolve clear. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I started, my voice steady, despite the tumult of emotions. Tonight, I'd like to share something very personal about my journey. The room fell silent, all attention on me. I started as a street entrepreneur, not just to make ends meet, but driven by a dream. That dream led to the creation of a sportswear brand that many of you know now. Pausing, I looked around, meeting the eyes of young athletes and seasoned businessmen alike. When my company's profits hit $500,000, I fulfilled a promise to a very special person, my grandfather. I continued, my voice growing stronger. He left a will stating that his inheritance would go to a relative who made their own success, reaching that exact figure in their business. Whispers filled the hall, and I took a moment to let that sink in. That inheritance has been used to fuel not just my personal growth, but to give back through charity, much like tonight's event. The crowd was listening, some nodding, as I unfolded more of my story. After the pandemic, my business didn't just survive, it thrived, growing several times over. Every challenge faced was a stepping stone. As I concluded, I stand before you, not just as a business owner, but as someone who believes in the power of perseverance and dedication. The room erupted into applause, some guests standing in ovation. I scanned the crowd, seeing faces light up with respect and admiration, but my eyes briefly caught Jack's parents. Their expressions, once haughty, now showed disbelief and embarrassment. They quietly exited the hotel. Jack, looking equally shaken, tried to approach me, muttering an apology. Eliza, I just shook my head and walked past him, my emotions a mix of triumph and heartache. I needed space, not just from the evening's drama, but from everything. I decided to stay at the hotel that night, alone with my thoughts. Later, as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, my phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was thick with emotion. Honey, I saw everything. I just want you to know how proud I am. To see you stand up there, telling your story, reclaiming your truth, you're everything I hoped you'd be. After spending a night at the hotel, to clear my head, I returned home. The place felt different, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves held the tension from the last few months. Jack was there, waiting. As soon as he saw me, he tried to apologize again. Eliza, I'm so sorry about everything. Can we just forget all this and start over? He pleaded, his voice desperate. I shook my head, the decision heavy on my heart, but clear in my mind. Jack, I can't. I don't want to be with someone who can't stand up for me, who sides with his parents over his wife. It's not just about last night. This has been building for a long time. His face fell, and he reached out, but I stepped back. I'm filing for divorce, I said firmly. I didn't wait for his response. I gathered a few essentials and left for my mother's house, the one I recently bought with the inheritance from my grandfather. It felt like a sanctuary after the storm I'd walked through. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. Thanks to the prenup we had signed, and with no children to consider, it was over quickly. During that time, Jack's parents tried to intervene. They called repeatedly, trying to patch things up, not for my sake, but because their son's lifestyle had changed now that I was out of the picture. I blocked their numbers. It wasn't just to silence the constant ringing, but to cut off a past that was holding me back. Through friends, I heard Jack started drinking, lost his job, and eventually, his parents disowned him, not wanting to tarnish their reputation with his downward spiral. I felt a pang of sorrow for him. Despite everything, I never wished him ill. But I knew I needed to move on. I couldn't dwell on what had been, only on what could be. Living at my mom's place gave me the peace I needed to think about my next steps. The business was still thriving, and I poured more of myself into it, not just to distract from the divorce, but to rebuild stronger foundations for my future. One evening, sitting in the garden my mom and I had started together, she turned to me, a soft smile on her face. You did the right thing, Eliza. It's tough, but you're tougher. And I'm here, always. Thanks, Mom. I know. It's just a lot to process, I replied, feeling the weight of her support. As long as you remember that you're not just surviving, you're building, learning, and growing. That's what matters, she said, squeezing my hand. She was right. The end of my marriage wasn't just an ending. It was a gateway to a new chapter. One where I could make decisions without second-guessing if someone had my back. One where I could stand on my own, not just as a successful businesswoman, but as a person reshaped by her experiences.